Cora Halloran dropped her 2 carpet bags in the dirt of the Blackwood Ranch yard, the sound a dull thud that seemed to swallow all the hope she had left. The dust, fine as milled flour, rose in a lazy plume around the worn leather, coating the faded floral pattern in another layer of Wyoming gray. Beside her, her son Leo, a small, silent shadow of a boy at 6 years old, clutched a fold of her skirt. His knuckles were white, his eyes fixed on the sprawling, long-limbed ranch house that looked more like a fortress than a home. It was a place of angles and hard lines, of weathered wood and unblinking windows, crouched under a sky so vast and empty it felt like a judgment. Cora took a breath, the air thin and sharp with the scent of pine and dry earth, and said the one thing a desperate woman was never supposed to say. She wasn't asking for help. She was making a proposition. A man had emerged from the barn, his movements stiff. He was not the owner. This one was all gristle and suspicion, his face a roadmap of sun and scowls. He stopped a good 10 feet away, arms crossed over a barrel chest. "This is private property," he grunted. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "I'm here to see Mr. Blackwood," Cora said. Her own voice was steady, a low and even tone she had practiced in the long miles walking from the last town, the one where the stage line had ended and her money had run out. "He ain't seeing anyone." The man, Jed, spat a brown stream of tobacco juice near her feet. It was a calculated insult, a clear drawing of a line. Leo flinched, pressing his face into her leg. Cora laid a hand on his head, her touch a silent promise. She did not move. She did not raise her voice. She simply waited, her stillness a counterpoint to the man's restless hostility. The sun beat down, turning the dusty yard into a skillet. From the direction of the corrals came the sudden, sharp crack of splintering wood, followed by a string of curses. Jed's head snapped toward the sound. "Damnation!" He started to move, then stopped, his glare returning to Cora, as if she were the source of all the day's troubles. "Go on," Cora said, her voice still quiet. "We'll wait." He hesitated, then spun on his heel and stalked toward the commotion, leaving Cora and Leo standing like 2 solitary fence posts in the immense, indifferent landscape. This was the moment she had dreaded and planned for. Not the arrival, but the waiting. The moment when her resolve would be tested by inaction, by the sheer, grinding weight of being ignored. She could see the scene at the corral now. A big roan, wild-eyed and slick with sweat, had slammed against a gate, splintering 2 of the rails. 2 other hands were there, one a boy barely out of his teens, the other a wiry old-timer. They were trying to corner the horse, their movements clumsy with frustration. A 4th man came out of the house. He moved with a slow, deliberate weariness, as if every step was measured against a dwindling supply of energy. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but stooped, his hair more gray than black. His face was weathered to the color of old leather, carved with lines of disappointment. This had to be Silas Blackwood. He stopped on the porch, his eyes the gray of creek stones after rain, taking in the chaos at the corral, then settling on the 2 figures in his yard. He looked at the woman. He looked at the boy. He looked at the 2 sorry-looking bags in the dust. His expression did not change. It was a mask of profound, unshakable fatigue. Cora watched him watch her. She knew what he saw. Another drifter, another mouth to feed, another problem washed up on the shores of his struggling land. She had seen that look in the eyes of bankers and storekeeps and men who had once called her husband a friend. It was the look of a door closing. The roan at the corral panicked again, rearing and striking out with its front hooves. The young hand, Billy, jumped back, tripping over his own feet and landing hard in the dirt. The horse scrambled, its iron-shod hooves dangerously close to the boy's head. Before anyone else could react, Cora's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear and full of an authority that startled even her. "Don't crowd him. Elias, get a rope on that back leg. Billy, stay down. Jed, back him toward the barn door. Slow. Don't look him in the eye." The men froze, their heads turning toward her. For a heartbeat, there was only the heaving breath of the horse and the vast silence of the high country. Jed's face darkened with fury at being commanded by a woman, a stranger. But the old man, Elias, after a moment's hesitation, uncoiled the lariat from his hand and began to move, his eyes on the horse's hindquarters. Billy, the young one, pressed himself flatter against the ground. Jed, caught between his pride and the undeniable sense of her command, took a hesitant step back, angling his body to guide the horse as she'd said. Cora took a step forward, never taking her eyes off the animal. "Easy now," she said, her voice dropping to a low, soothing murmur. It was the voice she used for frightened things, for skittish foals and for her son in the dead of night. Easy boy, just a bit of trouble. We'll sort it. The roan's ears twitched, its head lowered an inch. The wildness in its eyes receded, replaced by a wary attention. Elias, moving with the slow grace of long practice, swung his rope once, twice, and neatly looped the horse's back right leg. He pulled the slack, not hard enough to trip the animal, but enough to anchor it. With its movement constrained, the roan's panic seemed to drain away. It stood, trembling, its sides heaving. Jed, his face a thundercloud of resentment, grabbed the halter. The crisis was over. It had lasted less than a minute. Cora let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hand, still resting on Leo's head, was perfectly steady. She turned her gaze back to the man on the porch. Silas Blackwood had not moved, but something in his posture had shifted. The weariness was still there, but it was now overlaid with a sharp, assessing curiosity. He walked down the 3 steps of the porch and came toward her, his boots making no sound in the thick dust until he was only a few feet away. "You've got a way with horses," he said. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact, delivered in a flat, non-committal tone. "I've got a way with accounts," Cora replied, her voice back to its quiet, even pitch. "I can manage a household, mend what's broken, and stretch a dollar until it screams. I can tell you where every cent of your money is going and find the places it's leaking out. I know the difference between cost and value. My husband and I ran a ranch in the Montana Territory for 10 years. He's gone now. The ranch is too." She did not elaborate. The litany of losses, the fever, the bank, the vultures who picked the bones clean, was a story for herself alone. Silas looked from her to the small boy hiding behind her skirts. "I'm not hiring, and I'm not running a charity. I'm not asking for either," Cora said. She met his gaze directly. Her eyes were the color of moss, deep and steady. "I'm making you a business proposition. Give me 30 days, room and board for myself and my son. In that time, I will run your house, cook for your men, and put your books in order. I will show you, on paper, how my presence saves you more money than it costs. If, at the end of 30 days, you don't believe I am an asset to this ranch, my son and I will walk away. You'll have had a month of free labor. If I prove my worth, we can discuss permanent terms." It was a wager, a desperate, audacious gamble, and they both knew it. She was wagering the last of her strength and dignity against his deep-seated skepticism. He looked at her, at the unyielding set of her jaw, the straightness of her spine. She was thin, worn down to the bone, but she was not broken. There was a core of forged steel in her that he recognized, a competence that had been on full display just moments before. He was tired. God, he was tired. Tired of the endless struggle, the mounting debts, the betrayals that had bled him dry, both in spirit and in coin. He was tired of men like Jed, who worked hard but without thought, and of the land itself, which gave nothing without a fight. He looked over at the corral, where Billy was now brushing down the calmed horse under Elias's watchful eye. Jed was angrily repairing the broken gate, his movements jerky and inefficient. Silas's gaze returned to Cora. He saw the dust on her worn dress, the exhaustion in the fine lines around her eyes. But beneath it all, he saw the sharp, clear light of intelligence. He was a man drowning in chaos, and she was offering him order. "The house is a mess," he said, testing her. "The last cook quit 3 weeks ago. The men have been living on beans and biscuits." "I've noticed," Cora said. Her gaze flickered to the grimy windows of the main house. "That will be the first thing to change." He was silent for a long time. The wind picked up, whispering through the eaves of the barn, carrying the scent of sawdust and manure. Leo, still hidden behind his mother, peeked out, his large dark eyes fixing on the imposing figure of Silas Blackwood. "All right," Silas said finally, the word clipped. 30 days, room and board. You can have the old housekeeper's room off the kitchen. It's small." "It will do," Cora said. "Don't expect any help from the men. Jed's not like to take orders from a woman." "I don't give orders," Cora said. "I create systems that make sense. People tend to follow what makes sense." A flicker of something, not quite a smile, but the territory right next to one, touched the corner of Silas's mouth. It was gone in an instant. "The books are in my office. They're a disaster. All the better to show a difference," she replied. She bent down and picked up her bags, one in each hand. The movement was fluid, betraying a strength her slender frame concealed. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. You won't regret it." He merely grunted in response and turned, leading the way to the house. As Cora followed, Leo still attached to her skirt, she felt the weight of every eye on her back. Jed's hostile glare, Billy's curious stare, Elias's unreadable ancient gaze. She was an invader, an anomaly. The wager had been accepted. The clock had started. 30 days. She walked up the steps of the porch and into the shadows of the house, leaving the harsh, bright emptiness of the yard behind her. The housekeeper's room was more of a large closet, containing a narrow cot, a small washstand with a cracked basin, and one high, dusty window that looked out onto a wall of granite. It smelled of disuse and mice. Cora set her bags down, the same dull thud as before, but this time it felt different. It was not an ending, but a beginning. Leo stood in the doorway, his small body rigid, looking back into the cavernous, dark kitchen, as if it were the mouth of a cave. "It's all right, sweet boy," Cora murmured, kneeling in front of him. She gently brushed the dust from his hair. "This is ours for now. It's safe." Leo didn't answer. He hadn't spoken more than a handful of words in the 6 months since his father's funeral, his voice locked away with the memories of that terrible time. He simply leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers, a silent communion that spoke more than words ever could. She held him for a moment, gathering her strength from his small, warm presence. Then she stood up. There was work to do. The kitchen was a testament to neglect. A mountain of dirty dishes filled a dry sink. The stove was coated in a layer of grease, so thick it was black and sticky to the touch. The floor was gritty underfoot, and the air hung heavy with the stale smell of old coffee and fried bacon. For another woman, it might have been a dispiriting sight. For Cora, it was a map. It told her a story of a place without a center, a crew of men adrift. A home needs a heart, and the heart of a ranch was its kitchen. This one had stopped beating long ago. She did not pause. She did not sigh. She found a bar of lye soap, a bucket, and a stiff bristled brush. She tied an apron over her dress and her hair back in a severe knot. Then she began. The first task was water. She found the pump in the yard and worked the handle with a steady, rhythmic creak, filling bucket after bucket, her arms protesting but obeying. She hauled them inside, her movements economical, without wasted motion. She heated water on the filthy stove, the fire slow to catch, but eventually roaring to life under her patient tending. Leo sat on a stool she had wiped clean in the corner, his knees drawn up to his chin, watching her. He was her anchor, her quiet observer. As she worked, she spoke to him in a low murmur, narrating her tasks. First, the stove. Can't cook a decent meal on a dirty stove. It taints the food. She scraped and scrubbed, the grease yielding slowly, revealing the cast iron beneath. Then the dishes. A man can't enjoy his supper if he's eating off a plate that remembers the last 3 meals. She worked with a fierce, methodical focus that was almost a kind of meditation. She was not just cleaning a kitchen. She was reclaiming territory. She was imposing order on chaos, one scrubbed pot at a time. The pile of dirty dishes shrank, replaced by neat stacks of clean, gleaming tin and ceramic. The stove, scoured and polished with oil, shone a dull, healthy black. The floor was swept and mopped, the wood grain emerging from beneath the layers of grime. By mid-afternoon, the transformation was nearly complete. The room was still sparse, still worn, but it was clean, it was functional. And it smelled not of neglect, but of soap and hot water and the faint, clean scent of the lye. Cora paused, wiping a stray strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. She looked at her hands, red and raw from the harsh soap, and felt a grim satisfaction. This was tangible. This was real. Now for the food. She had seen the pantry. It was poorly stocked, but not empty. Sacks of flour and beans, a side of bacon, potatoes, onions, dried apples. It was enough. She found a sourdough starter, miraculously still alive in a stone crock at the back of a cool shelf, though it was sluggish and sour. She fed it, nurtured it, whispering to it as if it were a living thing. While it revived, she put a pot of beans on to soak and began peeling potatoes. The smell was the first thing the men noticed when they came in from the fields at dusk, stamping the dirt from their boots on the porch. It wasn't the usual smell of burnt beans or greasy bacon. It was the rich, complex, soul-stirring aroma of bread baking. It hit them before they even opened the door, a scent that spoke of home, of care, of something other than mere survival. They filed into the kitchen and stopped, staring. The room was transformed. The long trestle table was scrubbed clean, the lanterns lit, their chimneys washed and bright. In the center of the table sat two large round loaves of bread, their crusts a perfect, burnished gold. A pot of potato soup simmered on the stove, sending up plumes of fragrant steam, and a platter of sliced bacon, fried to crisp perfection, waited beside it. Cora stood by the stove, her face flushed from the heat, an apron still tied around her waist. Leo was at her side, half hidden behind her skirts again. She did not smile. She simply gestured to the table. "Supper's ready." The men hesitated. Billy, the young hand, was the first to move. His eyes were wide with something that looked like awe. He slid onto the bench, his gaze fixed on the bread. "Smells good, ma'am," he mumbled. Elias, the old-timer, followed, giving Cora a slow, deliberate nod as he passed. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of a long appraisal. Jed was the last. He swaggered in, determined to find fault. His eyes scanned the clean kitchen, the simple meal, the woman standing by the stove. He was looking for a crack in her competence, a flaw to latch onto. He found none. He sat down heavily, his silence a declaration of war. Silas Blackwood entered behind them. He stopped in the doorway, and his gaze swept the room. He looked at the clean floor, the gleaming stove, the neatly stacked dishes. He looked at the faces of his men, Billy's open appreciation, Elias's quiet approval, Jed's simmering resentment. He looked at the bread. Finally, his eyes met Cora's. He said nothing, but for the first time, the profound weariness in his face seemed to lift, just for a moment. He took his seat at the head of the table. Cora sliced the bread and placed it on the table. She ladled the soup into bowls. The men ate. They ate with the ravenous hunger of men who had worked hard all day, but there was a quietness to it, a reverence. The bread was perfect, a crisp crust giving way to a soft, tangy crumb. The soup was simple but deeply flavorful, seasoned with a deft hand. It was food that nourished not just the body, but some deeper, hollower place. Cora did not eat with them. She served them, then retreated to the small room with a bowl of soup and a piece of bread for herself and Leo. She could hear the low murmur of their voices from the kitchen, the clink of spoons against bowls. She had won the first day, but 30 days was a long time. She sat on the edge of her cot in the dim light, Leo curled beside her, and ate her supper. The bread tasted of survival. The next morning, Cora was up before the sun, the sourdough already working for the day's biscuits. She moved through the dark, quiet house with a purpose that felt like a prayer. This was her domain now. After serving breakfast, biscuits, gravy, and strong hot coffee that wasn't boiled to bitterness, she turned her attention to the next front in her one-woman war against chaos. The books. Silas's office was much like the kitchen had been, but instead of grease and grime, the mess was one of paper. Ledgers, receipts, invoices, and bills were piled on every surface. A paper drift of financial despair. Silas was there, staring at a map on the wall, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. "Mr. Blackwood," Cora said from the doorway. He turned. Cora. He used her first name. It was a small shift, but she noted it. "This is it, the heart of the problem." "A problem is just a set of facts that haven't been organized yet," she said, stepping into the room. She ran a hand over a stack of receipts held together by a rusty nail. "Where would you like me to start?" He gestured vaguely at the desk. "Anywhere, everywhere. I used to be good with numbers, but it all just got away from me." There was a deep vulnerability in the admission. He was a man accustomed to being in control of his world, and this room was proof that he had lost it. "I'll need a clear table, good light, and to not be disturbed," she said. It was not a request. He nodded, picked up his hat, and left, closing the door behind him. Cora stood alone in the quiet, dusty room. She rolled up her sleeves. The real work was about to begin. She started by sorting, creating piles. Invoices from the mercantile, receipts from the freight office, bills of sale for cattle, notes on wages paid to the hands. It was a slow, painstaking process. The numbers were a language, and she was fluent. She read the story they told, a story of small leaks, of careless spending, of a man too overwhelmed to notice the slow, steady bleeding of his own livelihood. She worked all day, stopping only to prepare the midday and evening meals. The kitchen was an extension of her campaign, a place to demonstrate her value in a way the men could taste and feel. The office was the war room, where the true battle for the ranch's survival would be fought. By the end of the first week, a new rhythm had established itself on the Blackwood Ranch. It was a rhythm set by Cora. The days started with the smell of coffee and baking, and ended with a hot, satisfying meal. The house was clean. The men's clothes, which she collected and washed in a large copper tub, were mended. Small comforts, but they added up to a profound change in the atmosphere. The ranch felt less like a failing outpost and more like a functioning home. Billy was her first and most open ally. He was a good-hearted boy who missed his own mother, and he was unabashed in his appreciation. He started bringing her small offerings, a bucket of fresh water without being asked, a handful of wild berries he'd found near the creek. He would talk to Leo, not expecting an answer, telling the boy about the horses or a hawk he'd seen. Leo, in turn, would watch him, his silence seeming less like a wall and more like a careful observation. Elias, the old sage, remained a quiet observer. He spoke little, but his approval was evident in other ways. He made sure the wood box by the kitchen stove was always full. When he saw her struggling to lift a heavy sack of flour, he appeared at her elbow and lifted it for her, giving a single, curt nod before disappearing again. His respect was a currency more valuable than coin on this ranch, and Cora knew she was earning it. Jed, however, remained the steadfast resistor. Her competence was a direct affront to his own sense of importance. He had been the de facto leader of the hands before she arrived, his authority based on seniority and a loud voice. Cora's quiet efficiency undermined him at every turn. He saw the respect the other men were beginning to show her, and it curdled in him like sour milk. He began a campaign of small rebellions. He complained the soup was too salty one day, not salty enough the next. He criticized the way she stacked the firewood, claiming it wouldn't dry properly. He made a show of remending a shirt she had already stitched, declaring her needlework flimsy. They were petty grievances, needles meant to prick and annoy. Cora ignored them. She refused to be drawn into his war. She simply continued her work, her focus absolute. The confrontation, when it came, was inevitable. It happened on a Tuesday, 2 weeks into her 30-day trial. She was in the kitchen, kneading dough for the evening's bread. The motion was rhythmic, familiar, a comfort. Jed strode in, his face flushed with anger. He'd just come from the smokehouse, where Cora had reorganized the hams and bacon, hanging them in a way that improved air circulation and would prevent mold. "Who told you to go messing around in the smokehouse?" he demanded, his voice loud in the quiet kitchen. Cora did not stop working the dough. She punched it down, folded it, and began to knead again. "No one," she said calmly. "That's my job. I've been curing this ranch's meat since before you were born, girlie." The diminutive was meant to sting. "The south-facing hams were beginning to show mildew," she said, her voice even, "and the bacon was hung too close together. You were about to lose a good portion of it. I saved it." "I don't need a woman telling me my business," he snarled, stepping closer. He was a big man, and he was trying to use his size to intimidate her. He loomed over the table where she worked. "This is how we do things here. We don't need some outsider coming in and changing everything." Cora finally stopped kneading. She looked down at her flour-dusted hands, then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. She did not reach for the heavy cast-iron skillet warming on the stove beside her, though its presence was a solid, reassuring fact. She didn't need it. Her words were her weapon. "Whose way, Jed?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. "Your way? That was about to let 100 pounds of cured meat spoil? Your way? That left this kitchen so filthy it was a health hazard? Your way? That had Mr. Blackwood paying for supplies he never received because no one was checking the invoices?" She gestured with her head toward the office. "I've been through the books. I know things. I know that the last shipment of salt pork was 10 pounds short, but you signed for it anyway. I know the fence wire you bought last month was the most expensive gauge when a cheaper one would have done the job better. Your way is costing this ranch a fortune." Jed's face went from red to a mottled white. He was stunned into silence. He had assumed she was just a housekeeper. He had no idea she was dissecting the ranch's operations with such cold, precise skill. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no defense. She was right. At that moment, Silas Blackwood appeared in the doorway that led from the office. He had clearly heard the entire exchange. His face was like granite. He looked at Jed, his eyes cold. "Is there a problem here, Jed?" Jed flinched, his bluster evaporating completely. "No, sir, Mr. Blackwood. No problem." "Good," Silas said, his voice flat. "Then I suggest you find some work to do, far from the kitchen." Jed threw one last venomous look at Cora, then turned and practically fled the room. The silence he left behind was heavy. Cora turned back to her dough, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had won, but it was a victory that left a bitter taste. "He won't trouble you again," Silas said from the doorway. He hadn't moved. Cora nodded, not looking at him. "He is afraid of the change." "He's afraid of being found obsolete," Silas corrected her. He watched her for a moment, her hands moving surely and capably in the dough. "You were right," he said, "about the salt pork and the wire." She glanced at him then. "There's more." He sighed, a long, weary sound. "I know," he said. "Come to the office when you're done here. Show me." He turned and walked back into his office, leaving the door open. It was an invitation. She was no longer just the housekeeper. She was a counselor, a strategist. The 30-day wager was already feeling like a distant memory. She had proven her competence. Now she was proving her necessity. An hour later, the bread was in the oven, and the kitchen was once again a place of quiet order. Cora wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and walked into the lion's den. Silas's office was no longer a chaotic mess. The papers were now in neat, labeled stacks on a side table. The main desk was clear except for a single, open ledger. It was a space transformed by her own hand, a space of clarity and purpose. Silas was sitting behind the desk, not looking at the ledger, but staring out the window at the distant, hazy line of the mountains. He looked like a king surveying a dwindling kingdom. He didn't turn as she entered. "Tell me," he said, his voice low. Cora pulled a small, worn notebook and a sheaf of receipts from her apron pocket. She had taken to carrying them with her everywhere. She spread them on the corner of the desk. "It's the supplier," she said, her voice all business. "Dawson's Mercantile in Crossroads. You've been dealing with him for years." "Jedediah Dawson. His father and my father did business together," Silas confirmed, a note of defensiveness in his tone. "That loyalty is costing you dearly," Cora said, tapping a receipt. "Here. Last month's bill. He charged you 9 cents a pound for flour. I have a mail order catalog from Kansas City. The highest quality flour, even with the freight charges, would cost you no more than 7 cents a pound delivered to the railhead." She laid out another receipt. "Barbed wire. He sold you the new Glidden patent wire at a premium, but your land is mostly rock and canyon. The old Burnell wire, which he sells for half the price, would hold just as well and be easier for the men to string." She went on, item by item. Salt, coffee beans, axle grease, kerosene. In every case, he was being overcharged, sometimes by a little, sometimes by a lot. The cumulative effect was staggering. It was a slow, steady drain. 1,000 tiny cuts bleeding his ranch dry. "It's not just overcharging," Cora said, her voice dropping slightly. She pushed a different set of papers forward. They were invoices for goods, cross-referenced with her own pantry inventory and the ranch's meal consumption. "He's shorting you. For the last 6 months, every sack of beans has been 4 to 5 pounds underweight. The barrels of salt pork are consistently light. You're paying for goods you never receive." Silas finally turned from the window. He picked up one of the invoices and stared at it, his face grim. The evidence was undeniable, laid out in her neat, precise handwriting. It was a betrayal that ran deeper than money. It was a betrayal of trust, of history, of a handshake agreement that had spanned 2 generations. "Dawson," he said, the name a curse. "I've known him my whole life. He's also the cousin of Marcus Thorne," Cora added quietly. The name dropped into the room like a stone. Silas's head snapped up, his eyes sharp and suddenly dangerous. "Thorne," he repeated. Marcus Thorne was his neighbor to the east, a man whose ambition was as vast as the land itself. Thorne had been buying up smaller ranches, consolidating his power, his methods often bordering on predatory. "It's possible Dawson is just greedy," Cora said. "It's also possible he is helping his cousin weaken you, making you more vulnerable to a buyout, or worse." Silas stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. He stared out at his land, the rolling hills of grass, the dark stands of pine, the silver thread of the creek that was its lifeblood. He had inherited this land from his father, and his father from his. It was in his bones. The thought of losing it, of having it picked apart by vultures like Thorne and Dawson, was unthinkable. "I had a foreman once," he said, his voice rough with an old pain. 10 years ago. Name was Miller. I trusted him like a brother. He was selling off my best calves on the side, altering the tallies. By the time I found out, he'd cost me nearly a third of my herd." He paused, his shoulders slumping. "After that, I stopped trusting. It's easier, safer." It was a confession, a glimpse into the heart of his weariness. He had built a fortress of cynicism around himself, and now he was discovering the enemy was already inside the walls, had been for years, disguised as a friend. "Trust isn't a feeling," Cora said softly. "It's a ledger. It has to be balanced every day. You verify the accounts, you count the stock, you trust the numbers because they don't lie." He turned to look at her, The respect in his eyes was deep and unfeigned now. He saw not just a competent housekeeper, not just a sharp bookkeeper, but an ally. A partner in a war he had been fighting alone for too long. "And what do your numbers tell you we should do?" he asked. This was the moment. The shift from employee to advisor was complete. Cora didn't hesitate. "First, you ride into Crossroads tomorrow. You take these invoices and my calculations. You don't accuse Dawson. You simply state that you'll be auditing all future shipments upon arrival and paying based on verified weight and current market prices. You let him know without saying it that you know. He'll warn Thorne," Silas said. "Let him," Cora replied. "Let Thorne know the days of easy plunder are over. It puts him on notice. Second, I've drafted a letter to the supplier in Kansas City. We can have our goods shipped to the railhead in Cheyenne. It's a longer ride to fetch them, but by my calculations, even with the extra freight costs and the time for a wagon run, we'll still be saving nearly 20% on our yearly supplies." She had not just identified the problem. She had mapped out the solution, complete with contingency plans. She had taken his abstract despair and turned it into a concrete, actionable strategy. He looked at the neatly drafted letter, the columns of figures, the sheer, undeniable competence of it all. "You were a rancher's wife," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "I was a rancher," she corrected him gently. "My husband was the heart. I was the head. We made a good team." The mention of her husband brought a flicker of old grief, a shadow passing quickly over her face before her composure returned. Silas nodded slowly. He picked up the letter to the Kansas City supplier and read it. He then looked at the stack of fraudulent invoices. A cold, hard anger began to burn away the fatigue in his eyes. It was an anger he hadn't felt in years, and it felt good. It felt like waking up. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "Tomorrow I ride to Crossroads." He looked at her, a long, searching look. "Thank you, Cora. This is more than I bargained for." "The 30 days are not over yet, Mr. Blackwood," she reminded him. "Silas," he said. "My name is Silas. It was a promotion. It was a bridge. It was the beginning of a trust that was being built not on sentiment, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of her worth." The following morning, Silas rode out as planned, his back straight, a purpose in his stride that hadn't been there a day before. Cora watched him go from the kitchen window, a strange sense of anxiety fluttering in her chest. She had set events in motion, poked the hornet's nest. Now they had to wait for the sting. She threw herself into her work with renewed vigor. She was not just a housekeeper on a 30-day trial anymore. She was a defender of this place. It was not her home. Not yet, but it was the closest thing she and Leo had. She saw the potential in it, the good bones beneath the neglect. She saw it in the sturdy construction of the barn, in the richness of the high pasture grass, in the steady, loyal work of men like Elias and Billy. It was a place worth saving. While Silas was gone, she undertook a new project. She went through the ranch's legal papers, old deeds, water rights filings, territorial grants. They were in even worse shape than the financial books, a jumble of brittle paper and faded ink stored in a dusty trunk in the office. She laid them out carefully, her fingers gentle on the fragile documents, reading the history of the Blackwood claim. The language was archaic. The surveys based on landmarks that might no longer exist. A lightning-scarred pine, a pile of stones, the bend of a creek. It was a puzzle, and she lost herself in it. Leo sat on the floor beside her, drawing on a piece of butcher paper with a nub of charcoal she had given him. He was drawing the ranch, the house, the barn, the figures of the men. He drew a tall man with a hat, Silas, and a woman with an apron, her, and himself, a small figure standing beside the woman. He was drawing their life as it was now. Silas returned late the next day. He rode into the yard looking grim, but resolute. Cora met him on the porch, a cup of hot coffee in her hand. He took it without a word and drank it down. "You were right," he said, his voice tired. "Dawson didn't even try to argue. He just folded, turned pale, and started sweating. He knows that we know." "And Thorne?" she asked. "The hornet's nest is poked," Silas confirmed. "I saw Thorne on my way out of town. He was waiting for me. He didn't say much, just gave me a look. The kind of look a wolf gives a sheep it's planning to eat." He sighed and ran a hand over his face. "He knows the easy game is over. Now he'll play a harder one." The harder game began less than a week later. The threat did not come in the form of masked riders or rustled cattle. It came, as Cora had suspected it might, on a piece of paper. delivered by a smirking deputy from Crossroads. It was a legal notice, an injunction. Silas read it in the kitchen, his face growing darker with every line. Cora stood across the table from him, watching him, her stomach twisting into a cold knot. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up, and the weariness was back in his eyes tenfold. "It's from Thorn," he said, his voice flat and dead. "He's found you." Cora felt the blood drain from her face. "Found me?" "He's the one who held the note on your husband's ranch," Silas explained, his voice rough with a dawning, terrible understanding. "When the ranch failed, the debt was still outstanding. According to this, he's claiming the debt falls to you, as the surviving heir, and since you have no assets, he is placing a lien on your wages." "I have no wages," Cora said, her voice a whisper. "We have an agreement for room and board." "He knows that," Silas said, slamming the paper down on the table. "This isn't about money. It's a weapon against me. The lien means that any value you provide to this ranch, your labor, your skills, is technically owed to him. By keeping you here, I'm in violation of his claim. He can sue me. He can tie this ranch up in court until there's nothing left." The trap was brilliant in its cruelty. Thorn had found her one vulnerability, her past, and turned it into a cudgel to beat Silas with. He was using her to cripple the very man who had given her shelter. The 30-day wager was meaningless now. Her very presence on this land was a liability. She was poison. "I'll leave," she said immediately, the words tasting like ash. "Leo and I will be gone by morning." The thought was a physical blow. To go back out there, to the road, to the dust and the hunger and the hopelessness, she couldn't bear it. But she couldn't be the reason Silas lost his home. "No," Silas said, the word a command. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not the calculating gaze of a rancher assessing an asset, but something fiercely protective. "No, you will not. That's what he wants. He wants me to throw you out. He wants to prove he can run anyone off my land, that he can isolate me and pick me off at his leisure." "But the law," Cora began. "The law in this county has a funny way of bending toward the man with the most money and the fewest morals," Silas spat. "Thorn has both. We can't fight him in his arena." He began to pace the kitchen. A caged bear. He was trapped. If he kept her, Thorn would sue him into oblivion. If he threw her out, he would be playing right into Thorn's hands, showing a weakness that Thorn would exploit until the ranch was his. He was checkmated. Cora watched him, her mind racing. The despair that had threatened to engulf her receded, replaced by the cold, clear focus that came to her in a crisis. She thought of the dusty trunk in the office. The brittle papers, the faded ink, the surveys based on landmarks and creeks. "There might be another way," she said slowly. "Not his arena, ours." Silas stopped pacing and looked at her. "What are you talking about?" "The ranch's papers," she said. "The deeds, the water rights. You said we can't fight him on his terms. The debt, the lien. So we have to change the terms. We have to find a fight on our own ground." A flicker of hope sparked in his eyes, quickly tempered by skepticism. "Those papers are a century of tangled mess. My father never could make sense of them all." "Let me try," Cora said. Her voice was steady, infused with a conviction she didn't entirely feel but desperately needed to project. "What was your father's was his. What is yours. Let me see if I can find the line between them." He stared at her for a long moment, seeing the unshakable resolve in her face. She was not panicking, she was not running, she was preparing for battle. He, the weathered owner, the cattle baron, was trapped and saw no way out. And this woman, this capable outsider who had arrived with nothing but 2 carpetbags and a silent child, was taking charge. "All right," he said, his voice quiet. "Show me." The kitchen, which had become her sanctuary and command post, was transformed into a war room. Cora sent Billy to the land office in the county seat, 2 days ride away, with a carefully written list of public records to copy. Thorn's deeds, his water claims, and the original territorial survey maps of the entire region. While he was gone, she and Silas worked. They cleared the long trestle table and, piece by painstaking piece, began to assemble the history of the Blackwood Ranch. Cora worked with the same methodical intensity she had applied to the kitchen and the financial ledgers. She smoothed out the brittle, folded documents, weighing them down with stones from the hearth. She read through the dense looping script of forgotten surveyors and land agents, her finger tracing the convoluted legal descriptions. Thence north along the ridge to the lightning-scarred pine, thence west to the headwaters of Cottonwood Creek, encompassing all lands watered thereby. It was a language of the land itself, and it was maddeningly imprecise. Silas, sitting across from her, provided the context, the oral history passed down from his father. The lightning-scarred pine fell in the blizzard of '78, he'd say, but I know the stump. It's over on the west slope. Or, Cottonwood Creek sometimes runs dry in August. My grandfather always claimed its true headwaters were further north than the official maps showed. They worked late into the night, the only light from a pair of kerosene lamps that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. Leo, wrapped in a blanket, slept on a pallet in the corner, his quiet breathing a steady counterpoint to the rustle of paper and the low murmur of their voices. For the first time, Silas saw the boy not as a burden, but as a silent testament to the woman's strength. She was fighting for more than just a place to stay. She was fighting for her son's future. When Billy returned, gaunt and exhausted but triumphant, he brought with him a roll of freshly copied maps and documents. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Cora carefully unrolled Thorne's deeds and the old territorial surveys, laying them next to Blackwood's. The table was now a patchwork quilt of claims and boundaries, a paper representation of a century of ambition and conflict. Cora's eyes moved back and forth between the documents, her mind a whirlwind of dates, names, and legal jargon. She was looking for a discrepancy, an overlap, a forgotten clause, any crack in Thorne's legal armor. The debt he held over her was from her husband's family land, miles away in Montana. It was legally sound, if morally bankrupt. Attacking it directly was fruitless. The only way to win was to create a counterclaim so significant that it would make his lien on her worthless. The night wore on. Silas, exhausted, had finally gone to his own room, leaving her to her work. The house was silent, save for the sighing of the wind outside. Cora felt a familiar ache behind her eyes, the strain of too little sleep and too much focus. She was about to give up for the night when her eyes caught it. It was a faint, almost invisible line on the oldest map, the original 1860s territorial survey, a line indicating a small, seasonal tributary that fed into Cottonwood Creek, the main water source for the entire valley. On this old map, the tributary was labeled Blackwood's Run. Her heart began to beat faster. She pulled Silas's original land grant, the one signed by the territorial governor himself. She read the description again, her finger tracing the words, "All lands watered thereby." Then she pulled the newer maps, the ones Thorne's claims were based on. On these maps, that tributary was gone. It was simply shown as part of the larger, undifferentiated watershed of Cottonwood Creek, which Thorne's property bordered. "Silas," she called, her voice a hoarse whisper. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway, pulling on a shirt. "What is it?" "Blackwood's Run," she said, her finger jabbing at the old map. "Your grandfather's deed grants him the rights to Cottonwood Creek and all lands watered thereby. This original survey shows a tributary that starts deep inside your property line." She pointed to the newer map. "Thorne's survey doesn't show it. It conveniently ignores it. But where does that tributary run, Silas? Where does it go?" A slow, dawning comprehension spread across Silas's face. "Sweet Mother of God," he breathed. He walked to the table and stared at the maps. "It runs east, right through the middle of Thorne's best grazing land. He built a reservoir there 5 years ago. He told everyone he was damming up seasonal runoff." "He wasn't damming runoff," Cora said, her voice trembling with the thrill of discovery. "He was stealing your water. He has been for years. That reservoir, his prize herd, his entire East Pasture operation, it's all dependent on water that legally belongs to you." The room was silent. The implications were immense. Thorne's legal attack on her, on them, was predicated on his own position being unassailable. But it wasn't. His entire enterprise was built on a foundation of theft. "The original survey holds precedence," Cora stated, her voice gaining strength. "Territorial law is clear on that. Later surveys can't just erase a prior claim. He's been trespassing on your water rights for years. The value of that stolen water, it would be astronomical. Far, far more than the petty debt he holds over me." Silas stared at the maps. Then he looked at Cora. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The weariness, the cynicism, the years of defeat, they all fell away from him in that moment, replaced by a fierce, blazing light. It was the light of a man who had been handed a sword when he thought the war was lost. "He thinks he has me in a cage," Silas said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. It was the first real smile she had ever seen from him, and it was a terrifying and beautiful thing. "But he's the one who's been living in my house." The climax was not a shootout in the dusty street. It was a meeting in Silas's office, the room now a symbol of the new order Cora had brought. She had requested the presence of the county land agent, a prim, balding man named Abernathy, who had come out from the county seat, clearly annoyed at being summoned to a remote ranch. Marcus Thorne was there, of course. He lounged in a chair, smug and confident, a predator who believed his prey was already trapped. He had brought the smirking deputy with him, for effect. Silas stood by the window, his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask of granite. Cora sat at the desk, the neat stacks of paper before her. Leo was in the kitchen with Billy, who had promised to show him how to carve a horse from a piece of soft pine. "Let's get this over with, Blackwood," Thorne said, breaking the silence. His voice was smooth, oiled with condescension. "I have a legal lien on the woman's labor. She is an asset attached to an unpaid debt. Her presence here is a daily violation of my claim. Either you turn her out, or my lawyers will begin the process of seizing your assets to cover the damages." Abernathy, the land agent, cleared his throat. "Mr. Thorne's claim appears to be legally sound, Mr. Blackwood. The debt is recorded, the inheritance is clear. It is an unusual situation, but the law is the law." Silas said nothing. He just looked at Cora. It was her stage. Cora slid a single sheet of paper across the desk to Abernathy. It was a copy of Silas's original land grant from 1862. "Mr. Abernathy," she began, her voice calm and clear, "could you please read the description of the water rights granted to the Blackwood property?" Abernathy put on a pair of spectacles and squinted at the paper. "All rights and privileges to the waterway known as Cottonwood Creek, from its headwaters to the southern boundary of the property, and all lands and tributaries watered thereby." He looked up. "A standard riparian rights clause of the period." "Indeed," Cora said. She then slid the old 1860s territorial survey map across the desk. "And could you please locate Cottonwood Creek on this survey, which was filed in conjunction with the grant?" Abernathy traced the line of the creek with his finger. "Yes, it's clearly marked. Please note the small tributary that branches off to the east, labeled Blackwood's Run," Cora continued, her voice unwavering. "Note that its source is well within the boundaries of the Blackwood grant." Abernathy's finger stopped. He leaned closer. "Yes, I see it." Thorne had stopped lounging. He was sitting up straighter now, a flicker of unease in his eyes. He didn't know where this was going, but he didn't like the tone. "Now," Cora said, pushing Thorne's own, more recent survey map forward, "please locate Blackwood's Run on Mr. Thorne's map." Abernathy looked at the newer map, then back at the old one. "It's not here. The waterway is shown, but it is not labeled as a separate tributary. It appears to be part of the general watershed." "A convenient omission," Cora said coolly. "Mr. Thorne built a sizable reservoir on his eastern pasture 5 years ago. He dams that very waterway. He uses it to water his prize herd, a herd whose sale has financed the expansion of his holdings and his legal pursuits." The pieces clicked into place in Abernathy's mind. His eyes widened. He looked at Thorne, then back at the maps. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice suddenly sharp, "is this true? Is your reservoir fed by this waterway?" Thorne's face had gone pale. His smug confidence had vanished, replaced by a trapped, feral look. "It's runoff," he blustered. "Seasonal runoff. Everyone knows that." "It is Blackwood's Run," Cora stated, her voice ringing with the authority of absolute certainty. "A waterway to which Silas Blackwood holds senior rights, established by the original territorial grant. For 5 years, you have been illegally diverting and impounding his water. You have built a significant portion of your wealth on stolen property." She paused, letting the words hang in the silent room. "I've taken the liberty of calculating the estimated value of the water you have stolen, based on standard rates for agricultural use. The number is substantial." She slid one final piece of paper across the desk. It was a single sheet with a number written on it. A very, very large number. Abernathy stared at the number, his mouth slightly agape. He looked at Thorne, whose face was now slick with sweat. The smirking deputy by the door had stopped smirking. "This is preposterous," Thorne stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. He was exposed, utterly and completely. Silas finally spoke, his voice a low, cold rumble. "The way I see it, Thorne, you have 2 options. You can tear down your dam and release my water, and we can have the court settle the matter of the 5 years of theft. I imagine that would keep you busy for a very long time. It might even cost you your ranch." He let that sink in. "Or he continued. You can sign over the note on the Halloran debt, marking it paid in full. You can sign a document, witnessed by Mr. Abernathy, formally relinquishing any and all future claims to the water from Blackwood's Run. And you can forget you ever heard the name Cora Halloran. In exchange for that, I will consider the matter of the stolen water settled. It was a checkmate, a public, humiliating, and total defeat. Thorn was trapped in a cage of his own making, and Cora had forged the key. He looked from Silas's cold, unyielding face to Cora's calm, intelligent gaze. He had underestimated them both. He had seen a tired old man and a desperate woman. He had failed to see the iron will in the brilliant mind. "Get the papers," Thorn choked out to the deputy, his voice thick with fury and defeat. His power, built on bullying and bluster, had evaporated. It was broken not by a gun, but by a woman with a ledger, a map, and an unshakable belief in the power of the truth. His defeat was not just legal, it was moral. In the small enclosed world of the high country, a man's reputation was everything, and his had just been destroyed. That evening, a profound quiet settled over the ranch. The air itself felt different, lighter. The threat that had loomed over them was gone. In the kitchen, Cora was preparing supper. She worked with her usual quiet efficiency, but the tension that had held her spine rigid for weeks had finally eased. Silas came and stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He didn't speak for a long time, just watched her. He watched her hands as she chopped vegetables, the movements sure and practiced. He watched the way the lamplight caught the stray wisps of hair around her face. "The 30 days are up tomorrow," he said finally, his voice soft. Cora paused, her knife still. She looked at him. "So they are." "The wager is over," he said. He pushed himself off the door frame and walked over to the table, picking up the small wooden horse that Billy and Leo had carved. He turned it over in his large, calloused hands. "You won. We won," she corrected him. "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "You won. You saved this place. I was adrift. I was letting it all slip away. You came here and you reminded me what it was worth fighting for, and then you showed me how to fight." He put the carving down gently. "This ranch, it's been in my family for 3 generations. It's got good bones, a strong barn, good water, rich grass, but it's been missing a heart. It's just been a place of work, a place of survival." He took a step closer. He was no longer the weary, cynical man she had met in the dusty yard a month ago. The fatigue was gone, replaced by a quiet strength, a renewed purpose. The lines of disappointment on his face seemed to have softened. "I'm not offering you a job as a housekeeper, Cora," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I'm not offering you wages. I'm offering you a partnership, half of this ranch, your name on the deed, next to mine, as an equal." Cora's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, speechless. It was more than she had ever dared to imagine. A home, a true and permanent place, security for her son, a future. "This place needs you," Silas continued, his gaze unwavering. "Your mind, your strength, your spirit." He hesitated, and a vulnerability she had never seen before entered his eyes. "I need you." It was not a claim of ownership, but an admission of need. He was not the cattle baron claiming a prize. He was a man offering his hand, his home, his future, and asking her to share it. He was asking her to take the house he owned and make it a home they shared. Tears she hadn't known she was holding back welled in her eyes. She had come here in desperation, offering her competence as a shield against the world. She had wagered her skill against his skepticism, and in the end, she had won something far greater than security. She had found a place to belong. "Yes," she whispered, the word full of all the hope she thought she had lost forever. "Yes." A slow smile spread across his face, the same smile she had seen in the office, but this time it held no terror, only a vast and profound relief. He reached out, not to touch her, but simply held his hand out, palm up, over the table, a gesture of partnership. After a moment, she reached out and placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and strong, a promise. Music. The seasons turned. The harsh Wyoming winter gave way to a green and glorious spring. The Blackwood Ranch, now the Blackwood Halloran Ranch, thrived. The new supplier from Kansas City saved them a fortune. The herd, now watered from 2 reliable sources, grew fat and healthy. The house remained a place of warmth and order, its heart beating strong and steady. Cora's quiet authority was now an accepted fact, her advice sought by Silas on everything from cattle prices to crop rotation. Jed, humbled and grudgingly respectful, did his work without complaint. Billy adored her, and Elias watched over her and Leo with the fierce protectiveness of a grandfather. One bright afternoon in late summer, Cora was in the kitchen, pulling a pan of golden brown biscuits from the oven. The room was filled with the scent of baking and the lazy buzzing of a fly against a clean window pane. At the table, Leo was bent over a piece of paper, a full set of colored pencils, a gift from Silas, spread around him. He was no longer a silent shadow. He was a boy who laughed, who ran, who was slowly, word by word, finding his voice again. "Mama," he said, his voice still soft but clear as a bell. "Look." Cora came over to the table and looked down at his drawing. He had drawn the ranch house, the barn, the corrals. He'd drawn the horses in the pasture and the cattle on the hill. In front of the house, he had drawn 3 figures. A tall man with a hat, a woman with an apron, and a small boy standing between them. They were all holding hands. Above them, the sun was a brilliant, blazing yellow. Silas came in then, stamping the dust from his boots on the porch. He stopped in the doorway, just as he had so many times before. He looked at the scene before him, the warm, clean kitchen, the woman he loved, the boy who was becoming his son. He was home. A deep, settled peace filled him, a feeling he had thought was lost to him forever. He was no longer just the owner of a piece of land. He was part of a family. Cora looked up and saw him there. She smiled, a full, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. It was a smile of contentment, of belonging. She had arrived here a widow, a debtor, an outsider defined by all she had lost. She had survived by her competence, but she had triumphed through her character. The ranch had needed a bookkeeper, a housekeeper, a strategist. What it got was the woman who made it a home.